My father didn't look at me when he told me I was being handed over to the Black Wolf. He only slid a contract across the table and said, "Sign it, Ha-jin. You're the only thing we have left to trade." I thought the terrifying alpha waiting for me would treat me like property, until he looked at me and said, "You're not here because they sold you. I've been waiting for you." At the time, I had no idea what that meant. My name is Yoon Ha-jin, and I was the youngest child in a family that had everything except a place for me. The Yoon family owned one of the city's largest shipping companies. My older siblings had grown up learning contracts, investments, and business strategy. My brother already attended executive meetings. My sister had her own department. Me? I was usually told to stay out of the way. That morning, I stood outside the conference room holding a stack of documents while my brother walked past me without even slowing down. "Give those to my secretary," he said. I thought father wanted them. My brother finally looked at me. "Then you should have been invited inside." He walked away. I stood there for a second, feeling stupid for asking. That feeling had become familiar. My family always reminded me that I was lucky. They gave me clothes, food, a beautiful room, and enough money that outsiders assumed I was spoiled. Whenever I complained, my father had one answer: "You owe this family everything." Eventually, I stopped asking what I was supposed to be grateful for. I just tried not to cause trouble. That was why nobody noticed what I did with the paperwork. I remembered things: numbers, names, dates, patterns. And lately, the company's financial records had been bothering me. A shipping payment would leave one account, disappear through two companies, and somehow end up somewhere completely unrelated. Certain workers were being trapped in contracts with debts that seemed impossible to repay. I didn't understand the entire system, but I knew something was wrong, so I started copying records. Quietly, I kept notes in a folder beneath my clothes and memorized anything I couldn't take. I didn't know what I was looking for. I only knew that the more I found, the less ordinary the Yoon family business seemed. Then my brother made a mistake. I knew something was wrong when 3 security guards appeared at the front entrance before breakfast. Then my father's office filled with people who normally avoided each other.
Phones rang constantly.
Doors slammed. My brother shouted at someone behind a closed door. For once, I thought maybe father would need me. That was embarrassing to admit, even to myself. Instead, he summoned me that evening. When I entered his office, my father was sitting behind his desk with my brother standing beside him. Neither looked happy to see me. "What happened?" I asked. My father stared at me. "Your brother made an error." My brother's jaw tightened. "Father, enough." I looked between them. "How bad is it?" My father leaned back. "Bad enough that people are becoming interested in our affairs." Something cold moved through me. "What kind of people?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "There is a man who can make this problem disappear." I should have known then. My father opened a folder.
Kang Tae-rin.
I recognized the name immediately. Everyone did. The Black Wolf, an alpha who controlled a criminal organization powerful enough that even wealthy businessmen lowered their voices when speaking about him. My stomach tightened. What does he want? My father's expression didn't change. "You." I actually laughed. It was the kind of laugh that escaped when something was too absurd to understand. "Me?" My brother looked away. My father pushed the contract toward me. "You'll sign it." I stared at the pages, then at him.
"No."
My father's eyes hardened. "You've been given a comfortable life because this family allowed it. Now you're going to repay what you owe." "I didn't do anything." "That isn't relevant." My hands started shaking. "Father, I'm your son." He finally looked directly at me, and somehow that hurt more than if he'd shouted. "You're my youngest son," he said. "Don't confuse that with being indispensable." I don't remember signing the contract. I remember the pen between my fingers. I remember my brother standing silently beside the window, and I remember realizing that nobody was going to stop this. Not even him. That night, I was driven across the city to Tae-rin's estate. The gates opened before the car even stopped. Security surrounded the property. Men in dark suits watched every movement. Then I saw him. Kang Tae-rin stood beneath the entrance lights, tall and perfectly still. He didn't look angry. That somehow made him worse. I expected him to tell me what belonged to him now. Instead, after hearing the arrangement, he turned to one of his staff. "Prepare the east bedroom." Then he looked at me. "Give him the key." I blinked. Tae-rin continued calmly, "Only he controls the lock." I couldn't speak. "And open a personal account for him." My confusion deepened. He looked toward the staff again. "No one touches him without his permission. No one enters his room without knocking." I finally found my voice. "Why?" Tae-rin's eyes settled on mine. I was ready for some cruel answer. Instead, he said quietly, "You're not here because your family sold you." I stared at him. "Then why am I here?" For the first time, something unreadable passed through his eyes. "Because I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for you." I stared at Kang Tae-rin, trying to decide which part of that sentence was supposed to frighten me. Maybe all of it. He was the Black Wolf, after all. A man people whispered about, as if saying his name too loudly might bring him to their door. And now he was telling me he'd been waiting for me. For what? I asked. Tae-rin's expression didn't change. "You should rest." That was it.
No explanation.
No threat. Nothing. He turned and walked away. I hated him a little for that. I hated myself more for following him with my eyes. The bedroom they gave me was larger than the apartment I'd once dreamed of having for myself. There was a private bathroom, fresh clothes, food waiting on the table, and, most importantly, a door I could lock from the inside. I tested it 3 times. Nobody came to stop me. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I expected someone to knock and tell me the rules. Instead, a housekeeper left a tray outside my door and walked away without saying a word. So I opened the door. "Is this some kind of test?" I asked her. She looked startled. "Sir, the food, the room, all of this. I was instructed to make sure you're comfortable." "By Tae-rin." "Yes. And what happens when I'm comfortable?" She hesitated. I almost smiled. There. That was the answer I had been waiting for. What does he want from me? I wasn't told. She lowered her head and left. I shut the door. Nobody in my family had ever done anything for me without eventually presenting the bill. So I couldn't believe Tae-rin was different just because he'd given me a nicer room. That evening I went looking for him. I found him in a private study, sitting behind a desk with several men standing nearby. The conversation stopped when I entered. Tae-rin looked up. "What do you want?" I crossed my arms. "You said I've been waiting for you." His eyes narrowed slightly. "I want to know what that means." "Not tonight." My irritation flared. "Then when?" One of the men beside him shifted nervously. Tae-rin raised a hand, and everyone else left. Once the door closed, I asked, "What do you expect me to do?" "Nothing." I actually laughed. "Right?" Tae-rin leaned back. "You can leave whenever you want." My laughter died. "You're serious?" "Yes. After my family handed me over to you? I didn't ask them to." "Then why am I here?" His gaze held mine. "Because you came here believing you had no choice." That answer bothered me more than a threat would have. I stepped closer. "If I walk out that gate right now, will you stop me?"
No.
"Send someone after me?"
No.
"Then what's the catch?" Tae-rin was quiet. "There isn't one." I didn't believe him. Of course I didn't. The next morning, I accidentally discovered why people feared him. I was walking through the lower hall when I heard shouting. A young man was standing near the entrance, terrified, while 2 of Tae-rin's men held him back. "You stole from us?" one of them snapped. "I didn't," the man protested. Tae-rin appeared. The entire room went silent. He listened to both sides without raising his voice. Then he noticed the young man's bruised wrist. "Who did that?" Nobody answered. Tae-rin's expression hardened. He looked at his men. "Let him go." "But boss." "Now." The man was released immediately. Tae-rin turned toward the frightened worker. "Go upstairs. See the doctor." The worker hurried away. Then Tae-rin looked at the others. His voice became terrifyingly calm. "If anyone under my roof is harmed again because you wanted information faster, you'll answer to me." That was when I understood. Tae-rin really was dangerous. But he wasn't dangerous randomly. He had rules. And apparently people who broke them regretted it. I was still thinking about that when Tae-rin entered the dining room that evening. He glanced at my untouched plate. "You don't eat mushrooms." I froze. "What?" He pointed toward the dish. "You've been avoiding them since yesterday." I stared at him. "How would you know that?" He didn't answer. Then he pushed another plate toward me. "Eat." My stomach tightened. "And you know I don't like being ordered around." His eyes met mine. "Then consider it a suggestion." I didn't know what to do with that. He noticed when I was overwhelmed. He remembered what I refused to eat. He never touched me without permission. But I'd never told him any of those things. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. "How long have you known about me?" Tae-rin went still. "Long enough." "That isn't an answer."
No.
"Then give me one." His gaze stayed on mine. "I've been following something connected to your family for years." My heartbeat changed. "What?" But Tae-rin said nothing. That was when I realized I was done waiting. I pushed my chair back. "You brought me here. You know things about me that I never told you. You keep saying you've been waiting for me, and every time I ask why, you give me half an answer." I walked toward him. "Tell me the truth, Tae-rin. Why did you want me?" For several seconds he simply watched me. Then he said quietly, "Your family's arrangement wasn't what brought you to me." My breath caught. "Then what did?" Tae-rin's eyes didn't leave mine. "You." I stared at him. And suddenly that sentence from the night before sounded even more frightening. "I've been waiting for you." I wanted to believe it was manipulation, because the alternative was far more dangerous. If my family hadn't been the reason Tae-rin wanted me, then I had no idea what he knew about me. And I was beginning to suspect that he knew something I didn't. Didn't sleep much after Tae-rin told me he'd been waiting for me. Every explanation I came up with sounded ridiculous. Maybe he wanted leverage over my family. Maybe he knew something about the records I'd been secretly collecting. Or maybe he was simply very good at making frightened people feel like they were already 3 steps behind him. The next morning, I found out just how much he knew. Tae-rin was waiting for me in his study. Several financial documents were spread across the desk. He tapped one with his finger. "Do you recognize this company?" I looked down. My stomach tightened. "Yes." His eyes sharpened. I immediately regretted answering. "That was quick," Tae-rin said. "I've seen the name before." "Where?" I hesitated. Then he slid another document toward me. I recognized that one too. And another. "These payments," Tae-rin said, "were made through companies connected to your family's shipping business. Do you know where the money went?" I stared at the numbers. "I know where some of it was supposed to go." "That's not what I asked." I swallowed. The truth was, I'd been watching these transactions for years. I noticed some workers were trapped in contracts they couldn't escape, I admitted. The debts kept increasing even when they paid. Tae-rin said nothing. "So I found ways around them." His eyebrow lifted. I sighed. "Sometimes I redirected payments. Sometimes I found legal loopholes. Sometimes I used money from accounts I was allowed to access. You interfered with your family's business. I helped people." The words came out sharper than I expected. Tae-rin leaned back. "Without telling anyone?" "Obviously." A strange look crossed his face. I frowned. "What?" "Nothing." I hated that answer. Then he pushed another file toward me. Inside were names I'd never told anyone about. People I'd helped. My mouth went dry. "How do you have these?" "Because I've been investigating the network behind those contracts." I looked up. Tae-rin's voice remained calm. "For years, vulnerable Omegas have been trapped through fraudulent employment agreements and impossible debts. I followed the money. Eventually, your family's company appeared." I stared at him. "And my name kept appearing in the wrong places." "What does that mean?" "You weren't taking money from them." He paused. "You were trying to undo what they were doing." Something inside me went strangely quiet. My family had called me useless. They'd told me I was too soft, too emotional, too stupid to understand business. Yet this terrifying alpha had noticed the things I'd done when nobody else cared enough to look. "Why?" I whispered. Tae-rin didn't answer. That silence told me there were still things he wasn't ready to tell me. I should have been angry. Instead, I was tired. Can I leave? I asked.
Tae-rin nodded.
Yes. I stared at him. He didn't ask where I would go. He didn't remind me that my family had sold me. He simply said, if you want to leave, I'll have a car prepared. I thought about my father's office. My brother refusing to look at me. The contract. The way my father had said I wasn't indispensable. Then I looked around Tae-rin's study. I'll stay. The words surprised even me. Tae-rin didn't smile. He didn't tell me I'd made the right decision. He only said, then stay because you choose to. Something about that sentence followed me for the rest of the day. And so did Tae-rin. Not literally. He gave me space. When I became overwhelmed during dinner, he noticed and quietly moved away instead of touching me. When I stepped backward during an argument with one of his men, Tae-rin immediately put distance between us. When I asked him not to come closer, he stopped. Every time. It should have made me feel safer. Instead, it made things complicated. Because I started noticing him. His voice. His scent. The way his expression softened by half a degree when he looked at me. I hated that my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I was beginning to want the man I was supposed to fear. That was dangerous. So I escaped into paperwork. One afternoon, while searching through documents my mother had left behind, I found an old legal file with my name on it. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the words beneficiary trust. I opened the file. My hands went cold. It was a dormant financial trust established by my mother. And legally it belonged to me, not my father, not my siblings, me. I read the documents twice. Then I found something even stranger. Attached to the trust were legal protections designed to prevent my family from taking control of it. Recent protections, carefully arranged, and one name appeared repeatedly in the correspondence.
Kang Tae-rin.
I stopped breathing. This wasn't something he'd arranged after my family sold me. The dates were older, much older. I slowly lowered myself into the chair. Tae-rin hadn't simply been waiting for the Yoon family to hand me over. He'd been preparing something for me before I even knew his name. And suddenly, I wanted to know exactly how long he'd been watching me. I kept staring at the trust papers like they might suddenly change their minds. So this is mine? I asked. Tae-rin stood across from me, hands in his pockets. It always was. Then why were you involved? Because your family would have taken it from you if they could. I looked up. And what do you get? Nothing. That answer irritated me more than it should have. Nothing? Tae-rin shook his head. The trust belongs to you, Ha-jin. I can't control it. I can't access it. I can't decide how you spend it. I looked back at the papers. For 18 years, every good thing my family gave me came with a debt attached. Food meant obedience. A room meant gratitude. Education meant I owed them my future. And now there was money sitting in front of me that apparently didn't require me to belong to anyone. I didn't know what to do with that. What am I supposed to do with it? I asked quietly. Tae-rin's expression softened. That's your decision. It was such a simple answer. For some reason, it scared me. Over the next few days, I started asking myself questions I'd never been allowed to ask. If I could live anywhere, where would I go? If I could work without my family's name opening doors for me, what would I actually want to do? If nobody could tell me I was wasting their money, what would I study? Tae-rin never answered those questions for me. When I mentioned starting something of my own, he only asked, what? I don't know. Then find out. I stared at him. That's your advice? Yes. You're terrible at encouragement. I wasn't encouraging you. I blinked. Then I realized the corner of his mouth had moved. I laughed before I could stop myself. That was the problem with Tae-rin. The more I saw him, the harder it became to match him with the monster everyone described. He was still terrifying. I'd watched one of his men go pale after making a serious mistake, and Tae-rin hadn't needed to raise his voice to make the entire room silent. But when a frightened employee later came to him about a personal problem, Tae-rin listened. He didn't mock him. He didn't use his power to make the man feel small. He simply helped. And slowly, without meaning to, I started wanting Tae-rin near me. Not because I was afraid of him, because I wasn't. That realization terrified me more. Then my family reminded me exactly why trust had always been dangerous. The first article appeared online one morning. Yoon Ha-jin manipulates infamous alpha for access to family wealth. I read it twice. Then I laughed. It was such an absurd lie that surely nobody would believe it. Then I saw the photographs, documents, messages, financial records. Some were real, and that was what made the lies dangerous. My family wasn't claiming I'd been innocent. They were claiming I'd deliberately manipulated Tae-rin into taking me because I wanted access to money and power. My stomach twisted. The comments were worse. Spoiled Omega. Gold digger. Family traitor. I closed the screen. For years, I'd been told I was weak, useless, and incapable of surviving without my family. Now thousands of strangers were saying almost exactly the same thing. Maybe my family had been right. That thought hurt more than I wanted to admit. Then another document surfaced. It suggested Tae-rin had been investigating my family long before I arrived at his estate. That part was true. I'd already learned that. But the document made it look as though I had simply been another piece in his strategy. I stopped eating dinner with him. I stopped sitting in his study. When Tae-rin entered a room, I found a reason to leave. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Finally, one night, he caught me outside the library. "Ha-jin," I stopped. Tae-rin studied my face. "What happened?" I almost laughed. "You tell me." His brow tightened. I stepped closer, forcing myself not to look away. "If my family had nothing you needed," I asked, "would you still have wanted me?" Tae-rin went completely still. I waited. 1 second. 2. 3. He didn't answer. Something inside my chest cracked. I nodded slowly, even though he hadn't actually said anything. "Right, Ha-jin." I turned away. I couldn't hear the explanation anymore, because the terrible part wasn't that Tae-rin might have used me. It was that I had finally realized I wanted him to tell me I was wrong. I wanted his answer to be yes, and his silence had made me afraid it wasn't. I thought avoiding Tae-rin would make things easier. Didn't. I stopped eating with him. If I heard his footsteps outside the library, I suddenly became very interested in whatever document was in front of me. If he asked whether I wanted tea, I said no before he could finish the question. Tae-rin never forced me to talk. That almost made it worse. One evening, I looked up from my book and found him standing in the doorway. "Have you eaten?" he asked. "Yes." His eyes moved to the untouched plate beside me. I sighed. "Fine. No." Tae-rin didn't argue. He simply turned to leave. Something about his shoulders bothered me. The black wolf was supposed to be impossible to shake. Yet somehow I'd managed to make him look tired. Then I started noticing other things. His meetings lasted longer. Security around the estate increased. His phone seemed permanently attached to his hand. And one night, I overheard 2 men arguing outside his study. "There was another leak," one of them said. Tae-rin's voice came coldly through the door. "How many people knew?" 4. "Then don't accuse anyone until you know which one." I froze. A few minutes later, Tae-rin found me standing in the hallway. "You heard. Enough." He looked exhausted. "Someone inside your organization is helping the people connected to my family." His expression hardened. "That's what we're trying to determine. Why don't you just find the traitor?" "Because if I choose wrong, innocent people die." That shut me up. Tae-rin rubbed a hand over his face. And suddenly I understood his silence that night in the library. He hadn't been calmly rejecting me. He'd been carrying something he couldn't safely explain. Before I could say anything, his phone rang. He answered. I watched his expression change. Not much. Tae-rin was too controlled for that. But I saw his jaw tighten. "Where?" he asked. A pause. "Get everyone out." His voice was different now. I followed him into the study. "What happened?" Tae-rin looked at me. For once, I saw something I had never seen in his eyes before. Fear. Not for himself. "Someone threatened my people," he said. I went still. "Your people. The ones who work for me. The ones who've been with me for years." His phone buzzed again. Tae-rin looked down. I saw a photograph on the screen. Then another. People I recognized from the estate. My stomach dropped. This is because of me? I whispered.
No. Tae-rin.
Don't. He stepped toward me, then stopped himself before touching me. That tiny hesitation hurt. I looked at him carefully. You're afraid they'll use me against you. His silence was enough. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. I mattered to him, not as a contract, not as an asset. Me. The thought should have comforted me. Instead, it made me angry, because I didn't want to be the reason he lost people he loved. So that night, I returned to the records I'd kept hidden for years. I spread everything across my bedroom floor. Payments, names, contract numbers, companies that existed only on paper. First, it looked like chaos. Then I remembered what I'd always been good at. Patterns. I connected one payment to another, then another. A shell company had paid a recruitment agency. The agency had trapped workers in impossible contracts. Someone had forged signatures to move the debt, and the money kept circling back, not to some outside criminal group, back to my family's shipping empire. I stared at the documents until my eyes burned.
No.
I checked again. The same names, the same accounts, the same dates. My family hadn't simply been connected to the network. The network had been operating inside the company I'd grown up believing was legitimate. My hands started shaking. For years, I'd thought my father was hiding a secret. I'd been wrong. He was hiding someone. I traced the transactions again, following every approval and authorization. Then I found the pattern I'd missed. My father's name appeared often, but never at the center. Every time the trail got close to the person controlling the operation, my father's signature appeared instead, as if he were covering for someone. I stared at the final document. Then I saw whose department approved it. My breath caught. My father wasn't the mastermind. He was protecting someone much closer to me, someone I had trusted. And suddenly I wasn't sure I was ready to find out who. I kept staring at my sister's name until the letters blurred. Yoon Ha-jin. She was the one person in my family I had trusted. When my father called me useless, she sometimes slipped food into my room afterward. When my brothers laughed at my mistakes, she'd tell me not to listen. I used to think she was protecting me. Now I wondered if she was simply making sure I stayed exactly where she wanted me. I went through the records again. The pattern was there. Her department had approved payments connected to the fraudulent contracts. Her authorization appeared beside shell companies I'd never heard of. And when I traced those companies backward, they led straight into the network. My hands started shaking. Then I found something worse. Internal notes about me. Keep Ha-jin away from financial operations. Another said, he is observant when given access. Maintain the impression that he lacks business ability. I stopped breathing. They hadn't merely ignored me. They had made sure I believed I was stupid. Memories came rushing back. So-yeon correcting my calculations in front of everyone. So-yeon laughing when I suggested something during family meetings. So-yeon telling me, Ha-jin, you're too sensitive for business. Let your brothers handle it. I had believed her because she was kind afterward. Or at least I thought she was. My fingers curled around the paper. The worst part wasn't discovering she'd betrayed me. It was realizing how much of myself I'd built around her lies. I went straight to Tae-rin. He was in his study, speaking quietly with one of his men. The moment he saw my face, he dismissed the man. What happened? Tae-rin asked. I dropped the documents onto his desk. My sister. His eyes moved over the papers. You knew. It wasn't a question. Tae-rin didn't pretend otherwise. I suspected. My chest tightened. How long? Long enough to know she was involved. Not long enough to know everything. I stared at him. And me. His expression changed. My investigation began because of you, Tae-rin admitted. Your name kept appearing around people your family was exploiting. So I was useful. At first, you were a lead. The answer hurt. Tae-rin didn't look away. But what happened after that wasn't planned. I swallowed. Then why didn't you answer me? He was silent for a moment. Because when you asked me, I didn't know who inside my organization was feeding information to your family's network. If I told you everything before I understood the threat, you could have become a target. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that wasn't good enough. But the truth was I understood. Understanding didn't erase the hurt. It simply made it harder to hate him. So what happens now? Tae-rin asked. I looked at the documents. I exposed them. His expression hardened.
No.
My head snapped up. I wasn't asking permission. Tae-rin went quiet. I don't want you to destroy my family for me, I continued. I don't want to hide here while you solve everything. Ha-jin, I've spent my entire life being told what I am. Weak. Useless. Too stupid to understand what's happening around me. My voice shook, but I kept going. I believed them. Tae-rin stared at me. I don't anymore. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Tae-rin asked quietly, what do you want from me? I took a breath. If you actually care about me, let me choose. His eyes stayed on mine. I want to expose my family myself. I expected an argument. Instead, Tae-rin nodded. Then stand beside me. I blinked. That's it. I said I'd protect you. I didn't say I'd control you. Something inside me loosened. For once, protection didn't feel like another cage. Then Tae-rin's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression immediately changed. What? I asked. He ended the call. Your sister is moving. My stomach dropped. Where? The shareholder gathering. When? Soon. Tae-rin picked up the documents. She knows the evidence still exists. I stared at my sister's name. And suddenly I understood. Seo-yeon wasn't waiting for us to expose her. She was going to destroy the evidence first. And if I wanted the truth to survive, I had to get there before she did. I had spent most of my life trying to prove I deserved the Yoon family name. That morning, I realized I was about to destroy everything that name stood for. My hands shook as I arranged the evidence across the table in Tae-rin's study. Bank transfers, shell companies, employment contracts, forged signatures, names of people who had been trapped by debts they could never repay. Tae-rin stood behind me, watching without interfering. You can still stop, he said. I looked up at him. Do you want me to?
No.
That answer came so quickly that I almost smiled. Tae-rin stepped closer, but stopped before entering my space. I said I'd stand beside you. I didn't say I'd take this away from you. That was the difference between him and everyone I had known. My father would have taken the decision from me. My sister would have convinced me I wasn't capable of making it. Tae-rin was giving it back. So I gathered the documents. And I went home. My father and sister were waiting for me before the shareholder meeting. I stood across from them in my father's office, looking at the two people who had spent years making me feel like an unwanted guest in my own family. Before we do this, I said, I want to ask you something. My sister, Yoon Cora, raised an eyebrow. What? Did you ever actually see me as your brother? For a second, nobody spoke. Then Cora gave a small, tired laugh. Ha-jin, don't embarrass yourself. There it was. That familiar tone. The one that always made me feel 12 years old. She stepped closer. Without father, without this family, what exactly are you? My chest tightened. For years, that question would have destroyed me. This time, I simply looked at her. You don't get to answer that anymore. Her expression changed. I walked out before she could say anything else. The shareholder gathering was already tense when I entered. People stared. Some whispered. My family's public accusations had done their job. According to them, I was an unstable Omega who had manipulated Kang Tae-rin to gain access to money and power. So when I stood and asked for the floor, several shareholders actually laughed. My face burned. I nearly sat down. Then I remembered every person whose name I'd found in those records. I stayed standing. This payment went through a company that officially provides employment services, I began, but 3 workers connected to it were later trapped by debt contracts. A director interrupted me. You expect us to believe this? No, I said, forcing my voice steady. Look at the next transaction. I showed them another payment, then another, different companies, different dates, the same accounts appearing behind them. The room slowly quieted. One document connected to another. One false company led to another. A forged contract matched a payment I'd previously thought was unrelated. People stopped laughing. Then Cora stood. Enough! She placed a folder on the table. My stomach dropped. I think everyone deserves to see what Ha-jin conveniently forgot to mention. She opened it. My name was everywhere. My signature. My account numbers. Transactions that appeared to show money flowing from me into the very network I'd been investigating. For a moment, I couldn't breathe.
No. Iwisparat.
Cora looked almost sad. Who else would know exactly how you kept your records? My own evidence had become a weapon against me. Then the doors opened. Tae-rin walked in. The room went silent. I looked at him, and for one desperate second, I wanted him to do what everyone powerful had always done. Take control. Destroy them. Save me. But Tae-rin didn't move toward the table. He only looked at me, and I understood. He wasn't going to rescue me from my own fight. He trusted me to finish it. I swallowed hard and turned back toward the evidence. Then I saw it. One transaction buried between dozens of others. I stared at the date, the account, the authorization code. My heart stopped. That one, I whispered.
Shall rush my visa paper.
Because suddenly I knew that transaction didn't belong. I stared at the transaction on the screen while the entire shareholder room waited for me to explain myself. My sister had built the trap carefully. My name was attached to the account, my signature appeared on the authorization, and the money seemed to lead straight toward the criminal network I had spent months investigating. But something was wrong. I leaned closer. The payment date, the authorization code, the order of the transfers. I'd seen this pattern too many times to miss it. Wait, I whispered. Soare's expression tightened. What? I looked at her. This transaction is fake. A few people laughed nervously. My father immediately snapped, Ha-jin, stop embarrassing yourself. But I wasn't listening to him anymore. I pulled another document toward me. Every legitimate payment in this network follows the same sequence. Authorization, intermediary account, then external transfer. I pointed to the screen. But this one skips the intermediary. One shareholder frowned. What does that prove? It proves whoever created this record knew what the transactions looked like, but didn't understand how they actually moved. I pulled up another payment. Then another. I showed the room where the timestamps had been altered, where account numbers had been copied, and where the supposed authorization had been entered after the money had already moved. The laughter stopped. My sister's face went pale. I kept going. This wasn't money I transferred. Someone reconstructed old records and inserted my information into them. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. For once, I wasn't trying to convince my family that I deserved to speak. I was speaking because I knew I was right. A shareholder turned toward Cora. Is that true? My sister didn't answer. I looked at her, and suddenly I remembered every time she'd told me I was too sensitive. Every time she'd laughed when I asked questions. Every time she'd gently suggested that business was too complicated for me. She hadn't been protecting me. She'd been training me not to look. Why? I asked quietly. Cora finally met my eyes. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was tired. Because you wouldn't stop noticing things. My stomach dropped. She continued, you remembered everything. Every payment. Every name. Every little inconsistency. So you made me believe I was stupid. You were harmless that way. The words hurt more than I expected. I thought about the few times she'd defended me when father shouted. The meals she'd secretly sent to my room. The moments I'd believed she was the only person in the family who truly cared. You knew, I whispered. Cora looked away. I knew what you needed to believe. That was when something inside me finally went quiet. Could have screamed. I could have demanded revenge. Instead, I simply looked at her and realized I didn't want my life to revolve around her anymore. For the first time, Tae-rin changed something because he wanted to, not because someone forced his hand. He began cutting the criminal operations out of his organization, even the ones he once believed were necessary to keep certain people protected. He kept the legitimate businesses, but redirected his influence toward people trapped in predatory contracts and financial schemes. I watched him do it from a distance at first. "You're really giving up that much control?" I asked one evening. Tae-rin glanced at me over his coffee. "Control isn't the same thing as protection." I almost laughed. Months ago, I would have thought those words were impossible coming from him. But he'd changed. And strangely enough, so had I. I used the financial patterns I'd uncovered to build something of my own. A small organization helping vulnerable people escape exploitative contracts before those contracts swallowed their lives. I knew exactly where to look for the traps now. Hidden fees, fake debts, companies that appeared separate on paper but were quietly controlled by the same people. My family had spent years telling me I was too useless to understand business. Turns out I was just paying attention to the wrong people. Tae-rin helped when I asked. That was the important part. He didn't take over. He didn't put his name on my organization or tell me how to run it. When someone suggested that his resources should make him the real owner, Tae-rin shut that down immediately. "It's his," he said, "not ours. His."
Mine.
I still wasn't used to hearing people talk about something belonging to me. One evening, while I was working late, Tae-rin found me surrounded by financial reports. "You're still here." I didn't look up. "Unfortunately, you've been here for 11 hours. Then you should have brought food 9 hours ago." There was a pause. I finally looked at him. He was staring at me with that familiar expression of controlled irritation. Then he placed a bag on my desk. I opened it. Food. I smiled despite myself. That was when Tae-rin finally told me what he'd meant all those years ago when he'd said he was waiting. He'd been preparing a way for me to escape my family long before I understood what he was doing. Not to make me his, to make sure I could leave, even if leaving meant leaving him. "I thought you were waiting for me to become useful to you," I admitted.
Tae-rinäs jävtäittäneet.
"I know. And you never thought about keeping me?" He looked straight at me. "I wanted you to stay," he said quietly. "But wanting isn't the same as having the right to decide." That sentence hit harder than I expected, because suddenly I understood. His greatest act of love hadn't been protecting me. It had been preparing a door and leaving it unlocked. He'd been willing to watch me walk through it, even without him. A few weeks later, Tae-rin stood outside my office after another long day. "Come home with me," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that an order?"
No.
"A demand?"
No.
"Then what is it?"
Tae-rin hesitated.
For perhaps the first time since I'd met him, the terrifying alpha looked genuinely uncertain.
"I'm asking."
I smiled slowly. "You know, you once thought you could wait years for me and I wouldn't notice." His mouth twitched. I stepped closer. I noticed. His guarded expression finally cracked. And I realized something. I didn't want the escape route anymore. Not because I couldn't leave. Because I didn't want to. "This time," I told him, "I'm choosing you." Tae-rin went completely still. Then he reached for my hand, slowly enough to give me every chance to pull away. I didn't. Years later, I still ran my organization from the office I'd chosen myself. Tae-rin remained terrifying to almost everyone else. To me, he was the man waiting outside my office when I worked too late. The man complaining when I forgot to eat. The man who still knocked before entering my room. My family once believed I was worthless enough to trade away. They were wrong. Being thrown away had led me toward the first person who taught me that love wasn't ownership. My life belonged to me, and whenever Tae-rin asked me to stay, I no longer heard a command. I heard a choice, and this time I chose him.